Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. Pleased to be joined by repeat guest and someone who's often requested to come on for his great insights, and maybe we even see his beagle in here at some point as well. But KC, thanks so much for joining me on the call again.
You bet.
So there's 2024 has been just as crazy as the last few years. There's no real idea on how to get a finger on the pulse of things right now. What have you seen so far in 2024? And we can talk about what your predictions will be for the rest of the year, but what have you seen so far in 2024?
Insanity, chaos, attempted assassinations, threatened Canadian port strike, now threatened East Coast port strike that's now delayed till January, elections. I mean, could we have had a more crazy 2024? And then the markets just say, let's set new records. But commercial real estate says, could y'all please send some money our way? Can we join the party too? We're not having fun.
It's so true. Well, so there's a little bit of relief. I saw a report actually yesterday that sentiment regarding commercial real estate is actually up, probably on the back of 50 basis point rate cut. What are you seeing and hearing on the street with regards to commercial real estate in general, which has taken a pretty big hit over 2 years? Do you see any relief with this interest rate cut, or what's happening right now in that space?
No, so the only relief I hear, like from the capital markets guys, is that they can reasonably price deals to get new stuff. They can securitize new stuff because it's a little better to hedge when you know the Fed actually is going to deliver on rate cuts, and the rates are more likely to go down than up. So you can hedge a deal and get a new deal done. But the refinance problems are just atrocious within the bank. So the bank regulators have said, please God, don't create another banking crisis like 2008 to 12 by, foreclosing on all the real estate and having us close, 480 to 500 banks. So here's what you can do for all that stuff that you have that needs to refinance. You can move LTV up to 80%. You can move debt service coverage based on pro forma rents and income, not current rents. They're doing anything they can to avoid the bank failure problems. And so they're allowing that to happen on the existing stuff, but they're saying, if you dare put one more commercial real estate loan on the books, we're going to come close you. So it's just try to fix what you've got to manage the allowance that you've got to build. The term I've given is they're just trying to do a slow burn until after the elections. And I think next after the elections next year, they've got to get real serious. I always talk about the Texas ratio, which is basically you look at a bank's total amount of criticized problem classified loans as a percentage of their capital, and we're approaching 400 to 500 of those that are over 10%. So banks are 10 times leverage. You get to a 10% Texas ratio, 10% of your loans are in trouble. That's all your capital. You're insolvent, and the regulators aren't doing a darn thing about it. They're trying to do everything they can to mask over it, slow burn it. But that's what they want to do to slide through the elections. And then on the capital market side, the delinquency rate on new loans, those going into workout, continues to rise, except for industrial. And then when you look at the loss on a loan, so when you get these loans that go bad and go into special servicing and they get resolved, the loss given a default is now over 60%. And largely that's skewed by office, but it's also retail. We're also getting hospitality in there. So those are numbers we have to go back to 2010, 2012 to see. So on the commercial real estate side, if you've got maturing debt, it doesn't matter if they cut it 50 basis points or not. These deals were underwritten on a valuation problem. They were underwritten on 4 and 5 cap rates, loan under 6%, Fed overnight rate. So we got a long ways to go. And they were underwritten, bigger LTV, an NOI that was thicker, that now has been eroded by higher property insurance rates, higher property tax rates. So the NOI is down 20 to 30%, and the cap rate is still up 150 to 200 basis points. Forget what 50 basis points does for you. You have a valuation problem to refinance, and that's the headwind that we still face.
So is it similar to what the dock workers basically did and pushed this problem or kicked the can down the road? Is that essentially what everybody's hoping for as well, as you can just kick this can down the road until something changes?
Yeah, or just get through the elections. And, everybody says, the Fed's apolitical. My term on that. When there's something that's BS, I call barbecue sauce on it. I spent 5 years in there. The Fed, there's only one time in the last 50 years that the Fed changed interest rates within 60 days of an election, you got to go back to Ford Carter. So they do move them during election year, but only one time this close to the elections. And then they do let's biggie size it, do 50 basis points. Are you kidding me? If you look at what was happening going to this meeting, they were coasting off of, the April and May slowdown in CPI and PPI that actually went flat to negative. But then in July and August, they went back up to plus 2%, plus 0.2 of a basis, or 0.2 of a percentage, 3% of a percentage. So going into this last meeting, CPI and PPI were going up. The jobs numbers were solid. I mean, so they went up a tick on, from 3.8 to 4.2. But there's a number of what I call recession indicators that said, Fed, you better pay attention. And I think what the Fed did is they panicked over the jobs revisions. That big job revisions that said we can't count jobs, which we've known forever. That's why I say go look at ADP job numbers, the real private sector. We missed it by 818,000 jobs this year. And so I think the Fed said, wow, we really may have a labor problem here. So they said, we better do something focused on our other mandate, full workforce, full employment. And they panicked and did 50 basis points, and they sent the market scrambling and confused and looking for recession. And then today we get a really good jobs report again. So I don't think they know what the hell they're doing any more than transitory inflation, or last December when they said 5 rate cuts ahead. And I said barbecues on that within 1 hour. And it took them 9 months to deliver 1, not 5 rate cuts. The Fed is a real problem for us.
So is inflation under control? Is that actually something that they're trying to still measure, or was the interest rate cut simply, as you said, is just a panic move?
So good question. So goods inflation, all from, the pandemic and supply chain distribution, that has come way down. So we're getting goods, or at least we thought so. We'll see how that works out in January. But when the port strike restarts, so that piece has come down into that, just under 3 to 4% range. But what hasn't is services and housing. And so the housing, if you look at the real data, the Federal Housing Finance Authority, FHFA, that looks at every county, and they include new construction. So Case-Shiller doesn't include new construction because they're in middle resale. So all inflation from new homes, that's not in the Case-Shiller data, but it is in the FHFA. So they look at everything and they're saying we're at 5% year over year. And in many states, we're still running 7 to 9% year over year. So housing's not tamed at all. We got a little bit of a reprieve from building over 100 or 500,000 apartments this year. That comes way down next year. So apartment inflation is going to go back up. Rents will be kicking back up. Housing is not tamed, and services inflation is not. Healthcare, legal, accounting, all those things that we need to spend money on services, those are still running 8 to 12%. And the Fed can't control services inflation, because if I need to go to the doctor, I need to go call my accountant during tax season, and they charge me a little more or higher copay, guess what? So what? I got to pay it. I'm sick. I need to get the taxes filed. And so they can't do a darn thing about services inflation. And that's what's up here. But they changed their mathematics and algorithm to underweight housing. So a year ago, housing was weighted around 40% of CPI. Now it's been dropped down to 25%. So they're playing games with the items that still have inflation to say we solved inflation. So goods inflation has come down, services has not, and the Fed wants to focus on changing with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, playing games with the numbers and saying that they've solved inflation. And I don't think they have. Look at what's happening with energy and the volatility in the Middle East. We could see the way things are going. We could see, energy prices go back 80, 90, or $100 a barrel and spike way up. Food inflation isn't down at all. Anybody that goes and buys groceries, like I do, it's not down. Autos have tamed a little bit, but they're still up 50% from where they were. Housing's not tamed. So I'm not in the camp that inflation's been tamed at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of threads I want to pull on there. Why can you highlight or spotlight KC and myself? So there's two opposing forces here. The Fed is historically going to try to use, if you could put KC on there, thank you. So the Fed is going to try to use interest rates to control inflation. I agree with you. Inflation seems that's still problematic in a lot of areas, especially since it had such big increases in 2021, 22. So you're adding even if it is 3%, you're adding on a number that's already been inflated. So it feels a lot worse when in reality, we'll probably almost needed some de-inflation to balance it out to that trending line of 2% that they're trying to target. What do you think that they do now that if there's still problematic inflation and then there's a lot of pressure to lower interest rates, even on the government side, the government has a problem with the amount of debt that they have. What breaks? What gives here now?
So that's the Christmas gift for whoever wins the election. And I think they have a real problem. So we'll start with that on the debt. So we're at record fiscal debt, and we set a new record. So earlier in the year, the Bureau of the CBO and BEA said that the interest on our debt was running a record $500 billion a year earlier this year. Well, they just came out and recalculated the numbers for fiscal year 2024. They missed it by 100%. $1 trillion on the interest on our debt. And that's greater than all of our spending on military or Medicare. Those are scary numbers, and they're still running the printing presses. And the day of reckoning is here. We are a fiat currency. We forget that they can't fail. We have BRICS moving forward, more countries joining, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and all the Middle East. That are tired of us being the reserve currency and manipulating monetary policy. So I think that's the whole fiscal thing. We can't continue to pay $1 trillion on our debt and then run up another $3 or $4 or $5 trillion every year because everybody wants to give the gerbil more pellets to spin around the wheel and vote for them. And, the immigration issues, the homeless issues. I mean, we're in a real fiscal mess. And that's what's really underlying, I think, the problems in the economy and inflation. And I think maybe the Fed also, besides the job revision numbers, woke up and saw the new numbers that we were going to have to be paying on interest on our debt and said, holy cow, we're part of that equation. We've gone from a quarter point, to over 6% on the overnight funding rate. We better start cutting this thing. So I don't know if they have a plan. I don't think either party is talking about fiscal restraint, fiscal discipline. It's, all either one party's going to spend more and the other's going to give tax breaks. That doesn't balance the budget.
Yeah, I watched the election debate, and neither one of them touched financial policy, primarily because both of their administrations have been culpable of printing a lot of money and spending a lot of money. So I don't think either one of them necessarily want to draw attention to their past track record. What happened? Like, how long can this go without having perhaps even austerity measures to bring in this problematic debt? Because how can you even raise interest rates if inflation is actually problematic and they're determined to handle it? How can you raise interest rates when it impacts the budget and on everything, even federal, state, provincial, everything's affected by interest rates going up? What gives? Where's the breaking point?
I think it's here. And, it's just been shocking to me that we've had the rating agencies so quiet about the U.S. bond rating and that we're not facing much more severe downgrades ahead. And it's all because of the elections. This is all politics. And people might not want to hear that, but everybody, whether it's the Fed, whether it's the bond rating agencies, whether it's the politicians, they're trying to get past the elections, hope their side wins, and then they hope they don't have to deal with the problem. But I think that we see very serious, not just single notch downgrades, but double downgrades to us getting where we're not even, maybe investment grade credit anymore, and those rates having to go up. And that'll affect everything from, the treasury rates down to municipal bond rates to everybody's bond issuance rating, because we're a junk credit. And I think it comes next year because who is going to buy our debt? China has been selling their U.S. Treasury bonds off. Europe's not buying our stuff. So what we're having is the Fed trying to tell the banks, well, maybe you should hold more treasuries. Remember that Silicon Valley Bank deal? And Silicon Valley Bank said, well, your business model is so risky. Maybe you should put some non-risky assets on your balance sheet, like treasury bonds. Oh, right. That's what cost them to fail. This is the kind of stuff you got going in the background that nobody's really challenging and connecting those dots. But I think the day of reckoning is next year. This fiscal situation is coming home to roost. We'll have 2 years until another, national election with, Congress and Senate, and a lot of debt to refinance. And so I think we see real serious problems. And then ask yourself this, the 50 basis point cut that the Fed did, how many people saw their interest rate on their credit cards go down? I didn't. right? And unless you refinance the whole mortgage and you're at, let's say you're at 3.5 to 4.5, why would you still go, where you're, just under 6? That's still a big rate. So who's going to go jump and refinance and put a lot of new existing home inventory on the market? And then the home builders are just having to cut the heck out of the homes. The size is getting smaller. The upgrades are getting less. I mean, they're taking everything out where it's going to be bring BYOC, bring your own carpet to closing, because they couldn't afford to put it in the price.
So what does that look like? And it's impossible to predict who wins the election. So assuming either one wins, what does it look like if the Democrats win? And what does it look like if the Republicans win the election? What do you see that looking like next year?
So if the country thought January 6th was upsetting, you ain't seen nothing yet. Half of America cannot tolerate either decision on November 6th. So half of America is so wound up, so amped up. I mean, we've had 2 assassination attempts on one candidate. When's the last? I mean, you got to go back to the 1960s, Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, to see this kind of amped up anger where it results in things like assassinations and assassination attempts. I think the country is so amped up by the politics of this election that the side that loses is not going to be able to accept the consequences. And I don't think either of these candidates are in a position or showing a temperament where they can tell the country, look, it is what it is. We got to bring ourselves back together. Let's sit down and find, some middle ground at least on what we've got to deal with here. I see this thing really polarizing worse, and that we could have a worse transition of power after this election. I'm very, very concerned.
So there's not really a good outcome either way. Are we looking at like another civil war starting to emerge? Maybe that sounds pretty dystopian, but
yeah, I hope not. But this is the kind of stuff that sets it up where you get the country this divided over an issue or 2 issues or 3 issues, and that you don't have leadership that has any inclination to amp it down and bring it back together. And it's on both sides. So I'm not just picking on one, or the other. Both sides are doing this. And then, the media is not holding either side accountable, like all this fact checking stuff. So like in the first debate with Trump and Kamala. So try to fact check Trump, not doing anything on Kamala. Neither one of them, their numbers. And Kamala's done, I think, like one, interview to really be challenged on. So what is your fiscal plan? So you say, oh, I'm going to make it better for, all Americans to live and more affordable, and groceries. I'm going to crack down on price gouging by grocers. Give me a break. Go spend some time and look at the thin margins in the grocery store business. Grocers aren't gouging. This has been residual supply chain. We're so stretched and thin on our supply chain that we get to January and we have the poor people say, all right, we got you through Christmas. We weren't the Scrooge, and we got you through the hurricane. And I think if we hadn't had Hurricane Helene, then I don't think they would have backed off, kicked us down the road. But every bit of recovery from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, all the way down, nothing could be brought in to help just deal with, recovery efforts and whatnot. So I think they realized the timing was really, really bad. They were going to be wearing the bad hat. So they said, let's give them time, get relief supplies in, get some rebuilding going, get through Christmas, and then we're hunkered down. And the West Coast port guys, they got what they wanted. The East Coast guys are going to get what they want. Trust me. And there goes inflation. Look at from the Suez Canal. So just the cost to bring goods now back down around Africa, Cape Good Hope, into the East Coast, it's $1 million more in fuel charges for those vessels to make that transit. So shipping cost, everything is just, so rubber band tight. It's got to go through the consumer. The grocers haven't been gouging us. Many of them have done a very commendable job with their supply chain and sourcing stuff. So I get really irritated when I hear things like that, and the media not really challenge and take it apart. But neither one of them have really can talk to you in detail about how their fiscal plan is going to work and how it translates through. Bring in some, top economists and have them take it apart. Neither one of them are doing that. The media is not challenging.
Yeah, that is troublesome. A lot of people on this call right now might be hearing this and wondering, what does that mean for the real estate market, and specifically industrial? In light of all these problems and all these challenges, what do you see 2025 for And perhaps you could even talk broadly, just real estate in general, but there's still interest in hearing about housing, the office market, return to office, retail. If you could touch on industrial, that'd be great too. But
Sure.
what does this actually mean? Factoring in all these different parts, what does it mean for real estate in 2025?
So industrial, if you're not industrial and you're say an office, call your office building an industrial building. It's vertical industrial, right? If you're an apartment building, call it, industrial for people. We're warehousing people so they can live. If you put an industrial name on anything you're doing, you'll get capital. The metrics on industrial are fine. Everybody got freaked out because we started building too many spec million square footers or 500,000 square footers. We got ahead of ourselves. I'm in Atlanta. We had 20 or 22 spec million square foot buildings at the beginning of the year. Those have all had to move through the digestion of the Python snake. We're getting there. And what occupiers and tenants are realizing is there's not going to be much new construction. So you've got rents that have been brought down. The merchant developers have had to cut, rents and prices and value expectations, but they're sitting there with those things and they don't want to go bankrupt. So the tenants are realizing now is probably as good a time as ever. You can get, instead of a $9 rate, you might be able to get $8.50 or $8 on that deal, and you can put it away for a long time, and you can have it right now. You wait, that discount's gone, and it's going to be 2 to 3 years to get a new building because the entitlement and zoning process has become all California. California's exported the nightmare of their entitlement process to everywhere: Colorado, Utah, Arizona, even here into the Southeast. So the tenants are starting to move. We're seeing in the second quarter, we saw really strong absorption, whether you looked at JLL or Savills or CBRE or Collier's numbers, all of them showed really strong absorption numbers and rents stabilizing to starting to go up. That's saying the tenants are realizing to keep building out my supply chain, keep being able to respond to retailers saying, I just can't afford this retail store model and I need to be more efficient. Then they're dealing. And I'll give you a real good example. I call it the small box apocalypse right now. So we had the big box, all the department stores and the big box stores, they went under, they closed, they went down. We're now what I call the small box apocalypse. So who's that? Dollar discount stores and really big drug stores. So Rite Aid's bankrupt. Why did Rite Aid have to go bankrupt? Well, Amazon went in and met with Blue Cross and Blue Shield and sold away their pharmacy contract to do e-commerce pharmacy fulfillment. Look at Walgreens. Walgreens has got all of these 50 to 75-year leases that were at insane numbers that looked good 10, 20 years ago, maybe when they did them. They can't afford those. And they've seen between theft in the stores and the online movement to everything they did, cosmetics, what's a photo department? Who needs to go get things developed in the photo department in the pharmacy? And then you look at the pharmacy, which is largely, program fulfillment, whether you're, Blue Cross or Scripps or whomever, it's all moved online. And so they're scrambling to get out of it. Walgreens isn't even reporting earnings right now, and are in very serious situation. CVS is probably the healthiest with their, they bought Aetna. So Aetna's not going to cannibalize them by killing them with their pharmacy. So what do we do with all these small box stores? Well, guess where all those goods are going? They're going into warehouses. More and more fulfillment of everything we consume, whether it's groceries, whether it's apparel, whether it's pharmacy, cosmetics, it's going into the big boxes, the warehouse boxes. That's not going to slow down. They're all trying to figure out. Amazon has said, we're going to quit building million square footers. We're going to build fewer of those and more 250 to 300,000 square footers that are kind of like airlines. So I'm in Atlanta. Delta has a hub in Atlanta, Minneapolis, and Salt Lake, and all the planes fly in there. They break them down. They shoot them back out. That's what the supply chain is going to. More 200 to 300,000 square footers that are being fed by fewer million square footers. But the industrial pedal isn't slowing down at all. It's where everything we're doing in this economy is dependent upon industrial and building that out. So industrial is going to be fine. On their delinquency rate, it's 3 basis points. 3 basis. You look at office at like 20% of all the office loans are going to special servicer, and then when they go in, they lose over 2/3 of their value. So industrial is the way to go. Multifamily is going to be okay. We got another year to go before we get rents recovering because there's not as much new supply. But here's the other piece of the equation, and it affects industrial too. The NOI side, the expense side of all property types has gone through incredible inflation that's not going back. And the 2 biggest ones are property taxes. I just did a big case in Colorado. I've done about 10 or so this year, and the tax assessors are nuts. They're continuing to raise the property taxes. Forget 5 or 10%. They're going for 25, 50 to 100%. Just did one in Colorado where they jacked it up, my first almost $1 billion property, and they jacked it up 100% in a 2-year period of time. That's nuts, totally nuts. And so that's one. And the other one is property insurance. So the property insurance has gone up, not only in coastal areas, but as you move inland, it's gone up 20, 30, 40%. And here's what's happened. We're all dependent upon the reinsurance market, and the reinsurance market's broken. So the way I explain reinsurance is it's like mom and dad's insurance over kids that have gone to college or out on their own. My kids, my 22 and 28, 29-year-old daughters, they have a little bit of an insurance fund. They can afford a wardrobe malfunction. They can afford maybe replacing their phone. But they go out and they total their car. They got to come to dad, the reinsurer, and I've got to replace the car. And otherwise, they don't have transportation. Well, that's what's happened to us in this country. Our insurance companies like Allstate, USA, State Farm, they can handle the normal casualty events. But for the big catastrophic, like Hurricane Helene, they would go by the reinsurance market. The reinsurance market would insure the catastrophic events. Well, the reinsurance market said, holy cow, America, the only thing worse than your fiscal problem is your insurance catastrophes, hurricanes, windstorms, firestorms, and we're done. We're not insuring anymore. We're done. So now State Farm, Allstate, USA, they have to also become mom and dad insurance. They got to be the reinsurance at mom and dad level. So the rates have to go up tremendously to cover all that casualty. And there's no fix in sight. None of the politicians are talking about it. They don't understand it. So for our real estate world, get ready for 25 to 50% increases in your casualty insurance every period it comes due. And so you take those two items, you've had a 30 to 40% hit to your NOI. How do you fix that?
How do you fix that?
Yeah. And so you probably got to raise rents a lot, right? That's inflationary to pass along these costs. Or you got to hope the Fed goes back to 0% interest rates so we can go back to 4% cap rates. And I don't see either of those things happening.
Yeah, that is a scary outlook because especially since a lot of tenants will look at the gross rent that they pay. They don't necessarily divide into individually, here's the net rent, here's what we pay in operating level expenses. They just look at what's their gross rent. And if the operating costs go up, and that's taxes and insurance, then that's going to start eating into the amount that landlords can try to increase their rent as well. So it's going to put some downward pressure on net operating income across the board as well. That becomes problematic too.
Yeah. And so what it means is all of us got to find a way to be more efficient and cut a lot of costs. The next biggest cost item is labor. So look what's going on in a warehouse. If you haven't been in a new warehouse in the last year, it'll blow your mind. There are more drones flying around and robots and very few people driving, the forklifts to go get the goods. That's all automated. And the technology and automation going into warehouses is bringing down the labor costs, which is helping them offset, the expenses like property insurance or the increased cost of building it. So that means less labor. So this case I just did, when people think, AI is no big deal, we'll still just, retrain people like the horse and buggy whip, elevator operators in New York, we'll retrain them and we'll find something else for them to do. So this big trial that I'm in, I walk in the courtroom and the first thing in the first day of my testimony I noticed was, guess who was missing? The court reporter. It's all technology. There's no court. Those are really well-paid wages, and think of how busy the courts were. All of them are obsolete. They're gone. They're audio, voice transcription, and I now can get a transcript in days instead of weeks. And they've got the camera to match it up with the audio, synced, with the dancing or whatever. So you just think of what AI is doing as well, and that's going to further hit office, because think of all the paralegals I don't need, the bank people that I don't need, that all the administrative stuff done in banks and paperwork and loan closings and the securitization world, they can all be automated with AI, and that workforce goes down, and I don't need that much square footage. But the warehouse is the one example. It's just going to get more automated, more efficient, but these underlying expenses are really what's eroding the NOI. And if your NOI is going down, it doesn't matter what the cap rate is. It doesn't matter what the Fed does on discount rates. You got a problem. It's that NOI is the thing that drives the valuation, and the valuation is in real peril.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to get your thoughts on office as well, because there's a market that's just been decimated, and I still don't think that full story is anywhere close to being told. But now that Amazon had come back and said we want everybody back in the office 5 days a week, that seems to have injected a little bit of optimism into that. I still think that there's issues, and including AI as it starts to replace some of the jobs. What do you think office looks like right now? What's the status of that market?
So these big companies that think they can tell everybody to come back to work 5 days a week, get ready for a lot of turnover. And it's happened. And I've talked to the big companies, whether even big hospitality companies, they're saying we want everybody, to come back in. And even though you might be doing office operations or accounting or whatnot, and we want even you back in, say, screw you. I can go get another job. I'm not going back. I can't afford with inflation to be commuting every day, dry cleaning, parking costs, gas costs, going out to lunch costs. I can't, and I lose 2 hours of efficiency. I can be more efficient for you at home. I may agree to come in 2 or 3 days a week, but I'm not coming back to 5. And these companies can try to huff and puff, and JP Morgan and all of them say you're coming in every day, and the employees are saying, go pound sand, go to Saudi Arabia and enjoy that. But we're not coming back 5 days a week. I got 2 millennial daughters that have changed jobs twice this year because of that exact issue, and they got paid more, and the companies are very fine having them, 3 or 4 days a week. I will never go back to work in an office again. Any employees that I look at trying to hire or whatever are like, Max, you can get me 2 days a week. So I think office is in real deep trouble. I'm doing a case right now, and it's in a major southeastern market. So it's not a coastal market. It's one of the big ones. And it's a high-rise office building in the downtown area. They had a big company name on top of it. And the company said, we only need half the space. So we're going to go in the other building. We'll just write a lease termination to get out of the other building. Completely gone. All the workforce gone. 22 floors of people gone. What do we do with that building? And in that particular submarket, the same thing has happened with every other major financial, banking, insurance company that occupied a lot of space. They're all gone. So the value of that office building that was underwritten and loaned on 4.5 years ago at $100 million, the new values, and we've had 2 or 3 appraisals done, is $20 million, 80% loss of value. And it's not deferred maintenance. It's not that it's bad TIs. It's not that it's a bad location. Nobody is going back to the office in downtown markets again. They're just not. They'll go back 2 or 3 days a week. And the accounting firms thought early in my career when I was going through all the accounting firm mergers, and they would allow us to say, we'll give you can get a rentable cubicle. You sign up for a cubicle or an office, and you can come in for the day you need to meet with clients, and you can be out of the office most of the rest of the time. This started 30 years ago with the accounting firms. And all COVID did was show us how to perfect it. And so I think office, we're not even in the second inning of the sucker. And the TREP data is showing it when you've got, the latest numbers I've got. Just did an analysis on this with the TREP stuff. I'll give you the latest numbers. It was scary. So office had the highest CMBS delinquency rate at 17% going to special servicers. So industrial was 3 basis points. Office, just the month over month was 12. The new one is 16%, highest of everybody. But retail was over 10. Multifamily was even up there at 6, double or triple what it was a year ago. And then their loss given a default, 63% in office. So everything they're resolving is they're seeing a 60+% loss in that asset.
What spillover risk is there that comes from all the lenders that have overexposure to office loans and all of a sudden have less money available to loan on industrial? So they love industrial, everything looks good, but if their balance sheet shows a bunch of loans that perhaps aren't even able to recapture, does that lend issues to trying to get capital put into industrial?
Absolutely, because the banks are the ones we can turn to for construction loans. Life companies, CMBS, they can't do that. They have to have a finished asset. So we're dependent on the banks that know how to do construction lending to deal with an asset in development, in creation. And so if they can't do that, it chokes off capital to even a healthy asset. And we're seeing that with industrial. If you're an industrial developer or merchant developer, they're seeing their regional banks tell them, you can't do it. we're told we can do crazy things over here to kick the can down the road and do a slow burn on our bad loans, but you can't put a new loan on the books. And it doesn't matter if it's 25% loan to value. We don't care if you're pristine, have all kinds of capital. We just can't underwrite any new commercial real estate because we're already commercial real estate concentrated. And I can map you throughout the Southeast right now of really good community banks that have done a good job, but they're concentrated in commercial real estate, and they're told they maybe did too much in multifamily, they did too much in office, and they're told, we don't care what your story is on industrial, no loans for no commercial real estate. Two really big ones that are completely shut down all this year. So then they decide they can go to credit unions, and now credit unions are blowing up because they figured out how to syndicate loans to get around their 19% limit in commercial real estate. So they're all over, and they didn't know what the hell they were doing. So you have lead credit unions that have never syndicated and managed a loan that are it's total disasters. The number of participants that have been screwed by the lead lender or the loan mismanaged that have huge losses. The litigation that we have coming out of syndicated credit union loans is going to make like the rest of my hair fall out. I don't got much left, but it's going.
So do you expect a capital crunch then as a result next year?
So we're going to have a full transition. So we always see where there's opportunity, capital will come back in, but at a higher price, maybe tougher underwriting to not make the same mistake. So I think we're at that point where private equity and family and friends funds that are saying, when you get an office building that's, now down to land value, maybe we'll step into that thing. Maybe we only need to lease 10 of the 25 floors and we can make a return. If we can get at that price, maybe we'll step in and do that deal. So we may look at structurally in big CBD markets that the new underwriting stabilized vacancy rate is 30 or 40% or higher. So you got what's the office building worth with a 30 or 40% permanent underwritten vacancy rate? That's how the capital is going to come in. They're not going to take risk. We're not going back to 10 or 15%, definitely not 5% stabilized vacancy in any office building asset. Just not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a scary outlook, I'm sure, for anybody that's got exposure to the office market, either on the debt side or even on the equity side. Do you have any forecasts on what you think interest rates look like next year? Are they going to ebb and flow, or do you have a target in mind on what you think?
I think the Fed wants to continue cutting because they know they have a problem. They know they overdid it for too long, and that's flowing through. But then when you get jobs reports like today that say, the hiring rate went up, the openings rate went up, the unemployment rate ticked back down, wages are still growing at over 5% in that range. Housing costs are still elevated. Understand what the Fed is doing when they cut rates. They're trying to stimulate the economy. When you stimulate the economy, what are you doing? You're trying to inflate, you're creating inflation. What the hell is the Fed thinking? That if they start stimulating this, then they bring back the thing they said they just conquered, inflation. And so, and the two biggest items we have are wages and housing. And look what the port strike is telling us. There are so many elements in our economy that were suppressed from COVID and post-COVID that they're done. And they're going to get their pound of flesh, and they're going to get back in the wage game. And then on the housing side, where does the workforce go? My daughters, they've given up on, one of them's almost 30, has given up on the concept of home ownership. She says, we'll rent, we'll move. If one city gets too expensive. So my oldest one moved from Sarasota, Florida to Tallahassee, Florida, because Sarasota just was too expensive. So she went back and got a job with the university, Florida State University, where her cost of living at the same wage or a little bit more is like a 30% increase in her household income because of the costs there. So this young workforce can say, I can move out of an expensive area and I can move inland. And if you look at what's happening in Midwest markets, as you move interior, look at Wichita, Kansas, great city that people wouldn't even think about. Why did Bombardier Aircraft move their headquarters there, and a lot of other things? They got great universities, great workforce. You got Boeing that makes all the fuselages. There's a lot of stuff that's going on good there. Huntsville, Alabama, Colorado Springs, Colorado is an alternative to Denver. There are a lot of great markets that you can go to. And if your skill set allows you to, to work remote, that's great. What I worry about are our first responders, our nurses, our medical, our fire, our teachers, that have to still be in these expensive markets. I just was out in Denver, and they're under complete total stress, and they can't afford housing. And many of them are, moved to mobile home kind of communities that are 30 to 40 miles outside the city, because that's the only place they can find that's under $2,000 a month rent. And how do they do that? How do they, think of the strain on their family and whatnot? So our local leaders haven't really thought through what do we put in local taxes and revenue that helps subsidize, some affordable housing, or if another apartment guy or public home builder wants to come in, that they've got to dedicate, they'll give them a higher density so they can afford to buy that land at that expensive price. So give them a higher density, but 10 or 15 or 20% of those residences have to be either priced or rented for those keys, first responders, key hospitality, all that you need to make your economy work, your convention centers. Where do they think these workers come from that put on the football game, the basketball game, and all the arenas and the concerts? Where do they think they live? I talk to them when I go travel, and many of them are commuting over 2 hours a day, and the employer's having to pick them up and bring them in because they can't afford to live anywhere close. And those are the issues that we are not talking about, and that we haven't structurally started to figure out. And if we don't, that has a residual effect on commercial real estate. So think on the office, think of all the restaurants, think of all the hotels, think of all the supporting commercial businesses that are going under. So I just get out there in Denver. The number of restaurant closures in Denver is unreal. It's like nothing they've ever seen, even going back to the oil patch days in the 70s and 80s. I'll give you one iconic one for anybody in your audience that's out west. So the Brown Palace Hotel. This was a place where the unsinkable Molly Brown set up camp after she survived the Titanic sinking. It's where all of the, rich people in the mining days and the real estate days, they would stay and they'd set up shop. It's just absolutely an incredible, iconic luxury hotel in downtown Denver. It's about ready to go under. People aren't going downtown, the homelessness, the cost, they're staying out in the suburbs. So here, an iconic, historic thing like that is going down because of what's happened in the downtown market, and they can't get the workforce. They can't get the valets, they can't get the maid service, they can't get them to come down and work because they can't afford the wages.
Yeah, it almost becomes a problem that makes its own self worse by you add in all these issues, and then you add in taxation, and then you add in, like you said, wage issues. And is it come to a point where we start getting more salary inflation then? And then does that add to more inflation? Like, is there an end to this problem, or is it just something we're going to have to face for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. It's like when you have cancer, but it's had cancer, and you fight it, and you fight it, and you fight it. But when it finally metastasizes, it's over. And we're at that point where some of these issues are so intertwined and balled up that our fiscal situation is about to metastasize into fiscal cancer. And we don't have any of our leaders looking at a local level, state level, or federal level on really what is the underlying problem. And one of them that people don't want to talk about because it's supposed to be politically incorrect is immigration. So we need a form of legal immigration, but we got to control our borders. And so when you look at what's happened, in the last few years, I mean, Trump shut it down and brought it under control. But then, the last 4 years, it's been opened up where, the border states like Texas and Florida said, okay, do you think that's cool? Then guess what? We're going to bring them all to you. We're going to dump off tens and hundreds of thousands in Denver, in New York, in San Francisco. And they dumped them there so that those cities that didn't seem to care could understand the cost of schooling, medical care, housing, that burden that was being put on Texas and Florida. So now it became a national issue. And people ask, well, why did Texas do it? Why did Florida do it? Because no one was understanding the national problem that this was creating. And so those things that we don't want to have dialogues about immigration and border and what, those are all that flow in here that affect the cost of housing. What was the number I just saw that FEMA is running out of money. So for Hurricane Helene, and what we've spent on housing, what FEMA's had to spend for the illegal immigration is greater than their total budget for hurricane disasters. They may not have enough budget to deal with another storm that hits. That's absolutely atrocious that in our own country, we can't take care of our own citizens because we have such an immigration and border problem out of control. And that's not a political statement. That's a fiscal statement.
Yeah, that speaks to the problem there. That adds to all the other problems. One topic I wanted to get your thoughts on as well is just all the geopolitical tension that's going on with Ukraine. That war has been going on for so long now that most people don't even think about it. And then you've got all the issues with Lebanon and Israel and Iraq, and then a looming potential China invasion of Taiwan at some point as well. Where do you try to put that all in context of us being somewhat isolated in North America? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so we're not dealing with the missiles landing on us. Take the average American and put them for 1 week on the ground over there in Ukraine. And just imagine after 2 years how those people live. I mean, it's destroyed. The country is destroyed. And look at what's happening in the Middle East, and whether the bombing and stuff that's going on. And now that we've got, we're not far away from someone putting a nuclear weapon on some of those missiles that are coming from, Iran or Iran based or whatever. There's a reason Russia wanted to partner with Iran so they can, one can bring the other the nuclear technology, where the other has the missile technology. And I think we're on the verge of full out implosion in the Middle East right now. And so the question is, do they destroy all of Europe? Do they destroy the rest of the world? And so here's why we're misguided here in America. So we're the energy independent nation of the world. We produce more petroleum than anybody else. So unlike the 1970s, where the Arabs could say no oil for you and they cripple our economy, we can say to the rest of them, no oil and natural gas for you. And we don't need it. We can function just fine, and we'll keep our reserves here, and we won't send them to Europe or the rest of the world that needs our energy. And then you even elevate what's going on in the global tensions when you get over commodities. We need to remember the lessons from why did Japan strike Pearl Harbor in the United States, for World War II? Because we backed them into a corner by shutting off their oil supplies and saying an embargo, no energy and oil for you. So Japan had no option but to come strike at us. And so these are the risks and the historic things that we're not going back and understanding. And that's what worries me in these geopolitical risks. The rest of the world isn't worried about what their 401k is doing. They're not worried about how their kids, college fund is doing. They're thinking about day-to-day survival. They're thinking about, maybe if I die as a martyr here, I can go up 3 levels in the next lives or whatever. We don't understand the thinking and the logic and what motivates and drives many other parts of the rest of the world and where they are. Go back and study Maslow's hierarchy of needs from Psychology 101 in college. And we start at the bottom with food and shelter. It's when we work our way up, then we can have 401ks and feel good about everything. The rest of the world right now, in many parts of Europe, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, they're down at food and shelter. And this is when we get really bad explosion of the geopolitical issues that we don't understand. I don't even know who's running our country right now. It's sure not Biden. Kamala's on the campaign trail. Who the hell is making decisions and running our country right now? It scares me to death. And if you're China and you want to know when is the opportune time to strike and take Taiwan, it's between now and the election. No one's paying attention. And what will we do?
Is that what would trigger us getting into the war if we are on the precipice of World War III? Or what event would trigger us having to get involved in that?
Yeah, I think it's, it's a nuclear weapon hitting Israel. And we've got to get involved in that. We can't tolerate that. So we've not been successful in getting Iran and the other participants with Hamas to say, knock it off, stop it. And we've not been good on the sanctions. So, they're able to sell their oil and refund and give money to Hamas. And then I think the other one is to Taiwan. It's a line in the sand that we would have to go defend it, just like a Pearl Harbor type event. And I don't think Americans fully appreciate that. We're too worried right now about, so I'm here in Atlanta. We had the Georgia-Alabama game last weekend. That was just an incredible game. First half sucked if you were a Georgia fan, but it was just one of the best comebacks. But we're too focused on SEC football. The NBA's ready to start. We got NFL football. Gosh, maybe even the Broncos might have a chance this year. Even the Atlanta Falcons look like they've come to life. We're focused on things that have nothing to do with our day-to-day lives that could really bring us to our knees. And I just, maybe I worry too much about it. Maybe I have to watch too much of the news and read the earnings reports. And I read in the earnings reports of these companies, and we're getting ready to start all over again here in about 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, with the earnings reports for third quarter. And the companies are telling us there's real problems. They can't control wages. They can't get the labor. They're able to increase prices, but their top line revenue growth is going down because the consumer says, I have $250 to go to the grocery store, Procter & Gamble or General Mills. And when I hit that $250, I got to start taking things out of the cart, or I got to figure out how to change what I put in my cart because that's all I've got. And I'm not going to buy more of your stuff because I only have $250.
Yeah, you're right. I think we in North America are easily distracted, and whether that's by grand design or it's just a symptom of us not having missiles flying over our head, we don't think about the issues that they're facing, and something could change that pretty easily. If China did go and invade Taiwan next week, that all of a sudden would be a topic that we need to dig into a lot deeper. So yeah, I think there's so much to factor in on that beyond just football. We need to be paying attention to all the fiscal issues and some of those risks as well. I've got a slightly unrelated question for you. And if anyone does have a question for Casey, please put it in the chat. The US Steel proposed sale to Nippon Industries in Japan almost has unilateral political opposition to it. Both Trump and Kamala have opposed that sale going through, of taking it from being a U.S.-owned steel manufacturer to now being a Japanese-owned manufacturer. And I'm on the side that this should be opposed. I think going even back to World War II, what won World War II was our ability to manufacture factories and airplanes, and that won us the war. If we lose control of that, and that all of a sudden becomes a Japanese-owned subsidiary, that was 80 years ago that Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. So that's still within one lifetime. What's your take on perhaps the reasons why it could make sense to sell it? They want to keep the jobs in Pennsylvania. U.S. Steel is saying that they might have to close it or relocate or do all sorts of drastic things that they're proposing would happen. What's your take on that potential sale?
Yeah, it's balled up again, and we're letting kind of the politics over what is the economics of the transaction. And so again, we're not learning our lessons from history. And as the world gets more divided, if you can't, it's a national security issue. So we're talking about U.S. Steel. This is a national security issue, first and foremost. And the arguments that are being made for the merger are along economics. Well, we can't compete. We can't be as efficient. Barbecue sauce. You've been able to compete. You've been able to do everything. You've been able to be innovative. Look at from the 70s when we really closed mills and we lost everything. We're not in that boat today. We're collecting and recycling steel and sending it to Indiana and making it into things. We need that. Boeing is the largest aircraft manufacturer in the world and is in serious trouble. What would Boeing's abilities be to make the fuselages and all the parts to have commercial aircraft? All the things, whether it's structural steel for infrastructure, roads, bridges, as a country, if you wanted to allow the U.S. Steel deal to go through, how do you deal with the national security issues? Do you structure in the deal a certain percentage of the jobs are in the U.S., a certain percentage of the materials, like 50 or 60% of all the structural infrastructure steel is here in the United States. So we have a first right of refusal on all of those products and in those materials. How do you structure the national security risk into the economics of that deal? And that's what nobody's talked about. And so I think you're exactly right. The U.S. Steel thing is a national security issue more than it's an economics one. And if we continue to allow things to go, look at chip manufacturing. Look at all of our chips, right? So we're going to have this chip act to bring all the chips back and be made here that are made abroad, that, someone hostile to us could be embedding code and things in those chips in their phones, just like Israel did, to Hamas. I mean, did we not learn anything from how smart Israel was to do that? You don't think they can do that to us and all of the other projects in manufacturing? So that's where I come in is, first of all, has anybody talked through and really understood the national security implications? And once that's done, then you can move on to the economics.
Yeah. So that got kicked down the road till, is that 2025 as well? Or is it?
Yeah, everything after the elections, Yeah. So we better understand these elections really do have consequences, and where, each of these candidates are saying things that don't necessarily back up with where their record and their philosophy is. And when I see a candidate that talks more about, the border, where they were afraid to go to the border, and they're now going to get tough on the border, or, transgender being a right when you're in prison versus homelessness in the United States, or FEMA being properly funded, I just get plain irate. Let's get back to the fundamentals. Look at the balance sheet. Look at our budget, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions. No one wants to make tough decisions anymore. Fire them all. Let's just fire everybody and bring in new people that don't know the old ways and how it works, and let them restart and restructure the whole damn thing. Otherwise, we could be at kind of a social or economic civil war. I talked about this 4 years ago, so I had a term for it on the 2020 elections. And I said, if it goes bad, and then we have a really difficult 4 years after that, we may have what I call Flexit. Florida and Texas take all their stuff and they just exit. And I believe the tensions in this country and the geographic boundaries and the values and, the differences in our ideology are so polarized that we're at a point that it could easily fracture. And you could see something like a modern day civil war.
Yeah, it really is. As you mentioned right at the top of the show, it's insanity. There's just so many things coming at us from every direction. What do you think most people right now, as we're roughly a month away from the election now, do you think most people just wait to see what happens on that before committing to any big decisions? Or is that just another factor that people have to take into account, and they're still got to just business as usual?
So I think a lot of people are availing themselves of early voting. They're just tired of it. They want to put their fingers in their ear, and they want to go on a trip, and they want to watch football or basketball or whatever and say, I voted, I made my decision. I don't want to hear any information. They're not dialed in anymore. All this campaign advertising, we're getting just slaughtered here in Georgia. And now I almost literally have to advance the TV or go to something else because I've got 5 political ads in a row that they're just driving me nuts. So I'm worried that a lot of people have already made up their mind, they've early voted, and they've tuned out. And so a major event between now and election day, it's too late. You've already voted. And so I worry about that. I worry about that we're going to be in a situation where we're going to bring back into focus whoever loses. Well, it was rigged. There's election integrity. The machines were bad. We didn't count them all. We can't count all of the absentee ballots because whatever reason. And so we're going to have that play out. And as a country, we won't wake up on November 7th and say, we have a decision. We got to live with it. Let's move forward. I really worry about, and remember when the next Fed's meeting is the day after the elections. So does the Fed have to do 100 basis point increase because of the volatility of the election results, or that it's unsettled, or that the stock market wakes up and says, oh my gosh, we elected one versus the other, and we think we've got to get totally out of the market. So I think most Americans are availing themselves more than ever to early voting. It's not just a convenience. I think they want to tune out, and they don't want to have to follow anything more between now and then. And they're kind of holding their breath saying, I hope there's divine intervention. I hope God picks the right one. I don't know. And nothing is fleshing these people out. I mean, we'll get one presidential debate and one vice president. We're going to get no more opportunity to follow up and vet into the policies and specifics of these candidates. Just, it's unacceptable.
Yeah, it seems like such a long election cycle when it first starts, but now we're a month away. It does seem like it's coming very quickly. And with so much at stake, I agree. It doesn't seem like there's been enough information out there. In light of all the negativity and viable reasons on just why to be pessimistic, what are you optimistic about? What are some areas where you actually see you're encouraged by?
So life has to go on. I mean, you look at, we're the most innovative, productive country, in the world. We've created, was it like half of all the patents and the technologies we've created. So, I'm very optimistic that, we can find ways to solve problems if we bring the right resources to the table. But just look at all the ways, look at coming out of COVID. We were the first country to develop the vaccine and then figure out how to distribute and us get moving and functioning again. So think of how bad that was and how quickly we came out of it. We're the first country to figure out how to redo our supply chain. So it's not just LA to Chicago anymore. It's now more of a north-south. It's working very well. Look at the Canadian National and or Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern Rail merger and how well that supply chain moves from Canada all the way down into Mexico and has fixed our supply chain. So, we get bogged down in the uncertainty and the volatility. And we used to have a thing called a fear index called the VIX. And it's the Chicago Board of Equities, VIX fear index. It's broken. It's been like 12 to 15 most of the year. 20 is where it's considered at risk. It's kind of inching its way back up there, but it's not a good predictor of what's going on. The bank side worries me, the Fed, that the institutions that we should rely on, the Fed's going to panic and they're going to come back to giving us almost free money. If anything starts to go, the labor goes, the recession sets in, you're going to see them doing, just like Volcker had to do 50 and 70 basis point increases on the way up, we could see this Fed doing 50 to 75 basis points going down. Remember, in the first year that they started this, it was June, July, August, September meetings. They did 375 basis points in a row in 2022. They could do 375 down if they see things really bad after the election. So I guess that's it. I mean, industrial strong. I'm largely cash. I don't believe in the market. I have a couple of recession indicators that I've been trying to bring people back to look at. So the first one is, you look at the yield inversion, and the yield inversion, everybody thinks when the yield curve inverts, that's when we go into recession. And that's not the case. It's when it reverts that we go into recession. The inversion tells us this isn't normal. And when it comes back out, that's when we'll have the recession. So we've just done that. We're 10 years above the 2-year. That's usually when you get your recession. So that's a good warning. The other one is the SOM rule. So this professor, Claudia Sham, Sham, developed this in 2019 for the Fed. And it looks at the 3-month average unemployment rate over what it was a year ago. And when it gets to 50 basis points or more, it's always been a recession. She went back in time. So we got very close to that. We were at 40 basis points until today's job numbers. So we were very close to that. So I think there's a lot of volatility. We need to be looking at that. The other one is the CAPE ratio, which is the cumulative average price earnings ratio. And so the other one is Warren Buffett. He uses the Wilshire 500 and looks at what the price earnings multiple is. It's at an all-time record, 22, 25, going to 30. So when you have these kinds of distorted price earnings multiples, and it's largely in technology stocks, everything we're invested in the stock market could go away just like that. Think of 1987, right? So we're not understanding why the stock market's going up and how out of balance that is. And whenever those things have gotten to those levels or double what is a normal level, we've gone into a recession. And the other one I look at a lot is the TREP data. TREP tells us, what's happening on those loans going to special servicing, the volume of ones that have to refinance and they're upside down, and then the loss given default. And all three of those are at record numbers, almost back to 2010, as bad as we were after the 2008, 2009 subprime mortgage crisis. And so in our commercial real estate world, TREP is telling us there's a lot of bleep ahead and it's not going to resolve easily. And so if you're a commercial property owner today, you need to be thinking two things. Number one, what really is my property value? Take apart your income and your expenses and look at a real NOI, because that's what anybody that's going to bring capital to the table on an equity infusion or a debt side is going to look at. They're going to look at 25% increases in property insurance. They're going to look at vacancy rates in office at 30 or 40%. On retail, 20+%. On industrial, maybe it's not 4 or 5% anymore. Maybe they're going to underwrite it 7 or 8% because they're a little bit worried about some of the construction still coming online. So understand your value, understand the mechanics of that income and expenses and whether you can really grow them. And then ask yourself, what dumbass appraiser can tell you what the cap rate is? I've been doing it for 4 years and I can't tell you. Whether I use a band of investment, whether I try to go get comps, I can go find any set of comparable sales to produce any cap rate I want today. I can go back farther. I can look selectively at certain markets. So, I believe largely in the band of investment. What does equity cost? What does debt cost? Put those together. That's a better proxy what that cap rate's going to be than any set of comparables out there. And so what that really then boils down to is what's the value of your asset? What's your debt? And when are you going to need capital? Do you have a tenant turning over? Do you, what kind of capital infusion, do you have to put in that property? And where are you? Are you at 100% LTV? Are you at 80% LTV? You probably need to still be, even with a good asset like industrial, you probably still need to be south of 70% LTV to get capital. And you got to go find a bank that's not real estate concentrated. So that last one I would say is understand your banking relationships and diversify them. So if you don't know the Texas ratio of your banks or the banks on the other side of a transaction, you don't understand if they're going to be able to close for a real estate deal. And there's not as many banks that have a really healthy Texas ratio as that we're used to. And particularly in the southern United States, we have banks that gorge themselves on commercial real estate lending because the big banks, JP Morgan, Citi, Chase, they wouldn't let you compete on all the other diversity of capital. So really take apart your income and expenses, really challenge and do sensitivity around cap rate to understand your value, and then look at what your capital need is. When do you have debt coming due? What kind of equity infusion and what's it going to cost? And if we're not doing that and prepared, you're going to need a lot more capital. It's going to be more expensive, and your NOI is going to be a lot less, even if you're industrial. Then I think you're unrealistic on understanding your real estate assets.
Yeah, that's very well said and great advice. Thanks for sharing that. I know we're 10 minutes past. That flew by for me. I could chat with you for 5 hours and it would feel like an hour. I know you're quite active on LinkedIn. I recommend everybody follow you on LinkedIn because you put out some great posts on there. Anywhere else? I know you've got a new website as well. I'll include the notes to that. Anywhere else people can get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so the new company is KC Nomics, Nomics LLC.com. And you can just, in LinkedIn, either use my KCMAICRE at Gmail or my KC Nomics. So I've been very appreciative I don't think any of my clients abandoned me after Red Shoe from the nightmare. I'm still living there, the nightmare of it, do your due diligence on any partner that you bring in. Could be more important than your NOI. But I'm very grateful to all that have supported me, that still have me come speak, that still use me, all the legal stuff. And we'll celebrate 1 year here, I guess the end of this month, we'll created the company and actually started revenue generation mid-November. So to be knocked to your knees and get up and still be going, a lot of good support. So then I just call it straight, like I see it. It may not be what you want to hear, but I will tell you, I was just out in Newport. Savills had me out. They were doing all their clients all over the world and a lot on ports and whatnot. And we had great dialogues and great stuff that they're doing. And I enjoyed that and kind of getting updated on what's going on out there at the Long Beach port and the LA port. The Southern California ports are hitting full stride. Even before the strike, they were back on good numbers, but we're seeing some consolidation from the ports in Northern California and Seattle and whatnot. Really, a lot of that consolidating to Southern California ports. They're very efficient, very good assets, and they got Union Pacific and whatnot rail to bring it up the coast. So our ports are a real asset that we need to value. Industrial is a property type to be in. If you're not industrial, relabel it, call it all industrial. That's the only way anybody's going to give you any attention or love. Everything else is gone. Multifamily will get through it here. Single family, we just can't build a home under $400,000 or $500,000. The alternative, I'm on a board of directors for a REIT known as UMH. And we do manufactured housing. We have 135 communities. It's a 50-year-old REIT, 55-year-old REIT, where the founding family is at a real passion of affordable housing. It's amazing what they can deliver for under $200,000. That you would be like what the GIs moved into coming back from World War II and going to the suburbs in those craftsman type houses and creating a suburban mall. We've got solutions. We just got to commit to it. We got to take all the NIMBYs that say not in my backyard and all the politicians that say give me more money so I can keep running for election. We need to get rid of the NIMBYs and the GIMBYs and find the let's get her doners, the Nike people. And we could solve a lot of these problems. So I wish my late father were around. He lived through World War II. He was in the Army Air Corps before it became the Air Force. And they did amazing things and came back and didn't whine and moan about it. And they, just did a lot of great things for America and their families. We need to get back to that kind of a generation. And I think we can. I think some of the Gen Z generation may be inclining that way. They're more motivated. They have a good work ethic. So it's generational swing. And so hopefully they're there. I'm raising Luke's in the background there with my beagle, Charlie Beagle. I'm teaching him to be a Beagle economist. He talks about the shortage of vets and how Chewy.com is doing and the growth of households with pets. So he comes with me. He's my service dog. I've got real bad diabetic neuropathy in my feet, so I have balance and walking issues. But it's great. If I knew all the privileges and benefits you get by being handicapped and having a service dog, I would have become a handicapped and got a service dog decades ago. I mean, it's amazing going through the airports, getting on the plane, and just having your dog with you when you're traveling. It makes life a little more manageable.
Absolutely. And yeah, Charlie's special. He's definitely special. I see that there's one comment I just want to get to real quick from KJ. Enjoyed hearing what you have to say, KC. I'm so glad you had KC Conway on the live event. All great information. Thank you. Yeah, there's a reason that you're requested so often, and there's a reason I keep reaching out to you is because you are no barbecue sauce. You call it as you see it. I love it. Every time we get to chat, I am always grateful and come out of it much more knowledgeable. So really do want to thank you once again for sharing your insights. And I know we're going to have a lot to talk about in 2025. So yeah, hoping you're up for it, because I'm going to reach out again and get your take on what's happening at that time.
You're one of my favorites. What you do for your audience and the industry is phenomenal. So I value it, and you just call and we'll figure it out. We'll get it done, because what you do is tremendous.
Well, thank you. It means a lot, and I will definitely be reaching out. Thank you once again, KC. Always enjoy it.
Thank you. Have a good one.